Take all the meta humor of the Animaniacs, amp up the trolling, and add a dash of superhero styling and body humor, and you've got yourself Freakazoid! While the show seems to be completely sure of who and what it is, it turns out there were a lot of twists and turns into bringing the show that gifted us with a PG version of Deadpool pre-Deadpool. He's here to save the nation, so stay tuned to this station and hit that subscribe button and bell. I'm Chris Carr, and on today's Nostalgia Trip, we're revisiting Freakazoid, a freak accident of a series. Before we get to checking out Dexter Douglas, Nerd Computer Ace, I want to give a shout out to our donors on Patreon, especially our super nerd sponsor of the day, Lauren Linton. Thanks to heroes like Lauren, I get to keep revisiting cartoons of days past, so thank you so much. If you want to pitch in, head on over to our Patreon page and see if a donation tier works for you. All right, freak out!
Nothing will stand in my way!
Hey, Freakazoid, wanna go out for a mint?
Okay.
For those of you who didn't grow up in the 90s, you may simply know Freakazoid as that weird blue guy that popped up in Teen Titans Go recently. Freakazoid was part of the kids' animation block on WB, and another animated series produced by Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg produced your childhood, y'all. All roads lead to Spielberg. While we're given a basic rundown of how Freakazoid came to be in the intro of the show, Dexter somehow getting zapped into cyberspace, it isn't until episodes 6 and 7 that we get the full Freakazoid origin story. Basically, a shady corporation called Apex manufactures computer processing chips known as Pinnacle chips. These are supposed to double your computer speed, get you on the internet, etc. Scotsman Roddy McStew realizes that there's a 1 in 4 million chance that a certain data sequence could render a user into a superpowered being with these chips, a Freakazoid. This compromised chip is a parody of the FDIV bug that ruined Intel's first run of their Pentium CPUs back in the early 90s. Now, rather than risk profits and Christmas bonuses, evil boss man Mr. Gutierrez, aka Ricardo Montalban with an eye patch, decides to not recall the chips and throws Roddy out the window. Cut to the Douglas home on Christmas Day. 17-year-old geek Dexter Douglas is gifted with this chip. His cat, Mr. Chobykins, happens to step on Dexter's keyboard, inputting the exact sequence that we just talked about.
We interrupt this program to increase dramatic tension. Thank you. And now back to our program.
Dexter triggers everything by hitting the delete button, sucking him into the net, and turning him into Freakazoid, a strong super freak. Roddy finds Dexter and hopes to be his mentor so he can control the freak. The two are abducted by Gutierrez, who wants to be superpowered himself. But Freakazoid is able to defeat him, and Roddy is able to hide the code, but traps himself inside the internet. In the Season 1 finale, Gutierrez is able to implement the code and gain Freakazoid-like powers, and some sweet Wrath of Khan hair. This leads to Roddy getting kicked out of the net, and the Scotsman recruits Freakazoid to stop the internet-enhanced Gutierrez. Gutierrez ends up lost in the net, which disfigures him, and the villain returns for his revenge in Season 2, and even teams up with Freakazoid's other foes in the series finale. Now, I bring up this specific plotline because this is pretty much the most plot we really get in the entire series. Most episodes are self-contained, irreverent, and don't worry too much about silly things like continuity and ongoing storylines. Supposedly, an early idea for the series was to have it act as a vehicle for an established DC comic character, the Creeper. Now, if you aren't familiar, the Creeper, aka Jack Ryder, was a journalist in Gotham City who would turn into this chaotic energy vigilante. This morphed into creating a fresh character who'd be this sort of manic version of Spider-Man, a teenage hero that Bruce Timm, best known for his work on Batman the Animated Series, would dub Freakazoid. Tim would borrow some concepts from Mike Allred's Madman, another super from comics, a sort of pop culture mashup of cheesy sci-fi and superhero tropes. However, as time went on, producer Steven Spielberg's vision for the series drifted from what Tim felt comfortable delivering. Said Tim, quote, "I don't mind that Freakazoid's not on my resume. I bailed on it really early. It started out as an adventure show, but it ended up turning into more and more of a comedy show. Every time we'd have a meeting with Steven, the concept would kind of change, and it kept leaning more and more towards zany comedy. It really started out almost like Spider-Man, on that level of like a teenage superhero. And it reached a point where it became a comedy with the Tiny Toons Animaniacs kind of humor. I don't have anything against that, I just don't have a flair for it. So I bailed." After Tim left the series, Tom Ruegger, who developed other Spielberg series like Tiny Toons Adventures and Animaniacs, was brought in to redevelop the show. Ruegger's version of the series used some of Tim's design and concepts, but Tim said that the series was radically altered to become the comedy series that was more to Spielberg's liking, which meant bringing some of that Animaniacs style to the series, mashing up slapstick, breaking the fourth wall, parody, surrealism, and pop culture jabs. So the series that the crew set out to make was scrapped, but became the weird and wacky iconic show we now have. Goes to show you, there isn't always a straight path to success. Even finding the voice of Freakazoid was a sort of freak accident. When looking to cast a suitable voice for Freakazoid, show writer Paul Rugg demonstrated what he thought should be the sort of vibe and standard they were looking for in a voice actor. The recording of his rendition ended up getting submitted to Spielberg, who gave his seal of approval for Rugg to play the titular character. Rugg has gone on to have an incredibly successful voiceover career, in addition to having so many notable credits. He's currently working on what I personally think is one of the greatest things to come out of 2020, Earth to Ned. Rugg didn't provide the voice for Dexter Douglas, though, the mild-mannered persona for Freakazoid's daily life. That was played by actor David Kaufman, known for voicing Jimmy Olsen on The New Adventures of Superman and Danny Phantom on Danny Phantom. One of my favorite casting choices here was having the legendary Ed Asner voice Sergeant Cosgrove. Ed Asner, who somehow has been crotchety and old since the 1960s. You timeless, cranky fella. I love you. One of my favorite fun facts surrounding the casting is that Asner was asked to not act when voicing Cosgrove, just to basically read and be himself. And it works beautifully.
Why don't you put some leeches on him?
Oh, no. I don't think that's wise.
Okay, but if you change your mind, I got a few in the car.
Cosgrove and Freakazoid's relationship is truly one of my favorite things about the series. It's just so pure. They're two bros who like to go and have snacks, maybe go to medieval times. They're just sweet. They're whatever the opposite of toxic masculinity is. Cosgrove will often explain the expectations of being a hero to Freakazoid, but he's never the cop talking about how Freakazoid is a menace or a danger to the Force or anything like that. He's just a friend who'll listen and sees if he wants to go get mints. Freakazoid also had a love interest in the series, Steph. In the pilot episode, Steph was set up to be a sort of Betty character, with the dark-haired beauty Valerie serving as her Veronica. This sort of Archie-esque triangle was immediately scrapped though, and Valerie only makes a few brief appearances outside the show's intro. Steph initially views Dexter as a creep, and dates his alter ego Freakazoid, totally unaware that they're one and the same. She eventually learns that Dexter was Freakazoid in the episode Mission Freakazoid, when Sergeant Cosgrove just blurts it out on a mission that Steph is assisting on.
Cosgrove?
Sorry, kid. I thought Steph knew. I mean, she's your girlfriend and all.
Now, if I'm being completely honest, the villains and the other heroes in the series weren't particularly memorable for me, and upon rewatching, were what I liked least about the show. And maybe you guys have a different opinion there. But me, I wanted to stay in step with Freakazoid. I wanted more antics with Gutierrez. I mean, that was a villain. He wears an eye patch, even though he doesn't have a bad eye. The dude interrogated a cat at one point. And as a Trekkie, thanks to my dad, all those con references were so very choice.
They wrap around your brain and make you all crazy. But no.
Sure, characters like the Lobe were fun and super comic booky. But while I can appreciate characters like the Huntsman being a Charlton Heston Green Arrow, or Lord Bravery being an exploration basically in what it would be like to give John Cleese superpowers, they all felt like filler. And I mean, yeah, to some degree they were. Freakazoid was following a Tiny Toons Animaniacs skit formula. But for me personally, I'd love it if we had kept the focus on Freakazoid and had these other folks more seamlessly woven into his stories. After all, we already had so many weird segments and gags packed into his bits. Like those other shows, though, the series thrives with its self-aware humor. There's impromptu commercials built into the show. Like they show you the Freakazoid Mobile and then show you an advertisement for the Freakazoid Mobile toy, taking jabs at the marketing and merchandising that went hand in hand with animated programming at the time. There were running gags, which were so fun to really pay attention to watching as an adult. One ongoing joke was using fake credits that would include Weena Mercader as the Hopping Woman, and never having that character appear. But my personal favorite is the horrifyingly designed Emmett Neverend. This creepy little dude is in every single episode at least once. He's short, with a few straw-like pieces of hair, and he's so creepy because he just smiles and stares at the camera, giving viewers this weird Where's Waldo Easter egg to look for. Usually the credits would reveal how many times Emmett popped up. So, if you're looking for a new way to stay entertained in quarantine, play How Many Emmets? Unlike shows like Animaniacs or Batman that played to a wide audience of all ages, Freakazoid found its success in older teens and adults. In this pre-Adult Swim world, though, this actually hindered the show. When WB sold commercial slots, they based their selections on their assumed audience. Kids. The older audience led to the show being considered for a primetime slot, but ultimately, the network canceled the series after a mere 24 episodes due to low ratings. People just didn't get this show, which is a real shame. Freakazoid was way ahead of its time. He was basically a family-friendly merc with a mouth. And while Deadpool was created a few years prior, he didn't take on his more comedic persona until about 1997. Coincidence? I mean, probably. But it's pretty cool that Freakazoid was possibly the OG fourth wall breaking soup. Freakazoid also heavily influenced the sort of humor millennials wanted and expect from their shows. And why we have things like Adult Swim now that thrive when delivering fake commercials and satire. Much like how Too Many Cooks got notoriety, I remember when I was a kid, my brother and I were constantly quoting the Hugbees commercial from Freakazoid. We were obsessed with it! And our parents were so baffled as to why we thought it was funny. It was that hashtag so random brand of humor before anyone knew what to do with it. I already had superheroes doing fantastic feats, but I didn't have some goober running around with his arms in the air, making whooshing noises like some sort of Monty Python take on comic heroes. The guy could travel like lightning, and usually opted for that doofy run because he loved it, and I loved it.
Fly!
Freakazoid, you don't fly.
Oh, right.
Is the show perfect? I mean, not quite. There are definitely missed opportunities, like fleshing out Steph. And we never see Freakette from that first episode when she's teased. And we could have even had more opportunities for lampooning the superhero genre. But this all could have perhaps happened down the line if the show had been given more time. And as a show that was so ahead of its time, it would absolutely thrive in today's overly saturated with superheroes world that's so very in love with reboots right now. I mean, with the resurgence of reboots, especially Animaniacs and Tiny Toons, now would be the perfect time to resurrect and re-examine the absurdist Dadaism of Freakazoid that was so far ahead of its time in the 90s. At the end of the day, Freakazoid shouldn't have worked, and ultimately, it didn't for most audiences. But it could today. Now that humor has finally caught up to this avant-garde style of humor, new audiences are primed for this old gem. Freakazoid went beyond the zany comedy of Animaniacs and dove further into the well of absurdity. It always ran with being silly over making sense, and embraced its inner freak. Well worth a rewatch to remind us that things don't have to make sense for us to enjoy them.
My Freakalair.
I didn't know you had one of these.
Well, in this episode anyway, we're trying a lot of stuff out, seeing what sticks.
But of course, guys, those are just my thoughts on Freakazoid. What do you all remember about the show? Get in with your hot takes in the comments below, and be sure to let me know what you'd like our next nostalgia trip to be. If you liked this video, give it a like, and click to the left for more cartoon content. Thanks again to all of our donors on Patreon, and thank you for watching. Until the next detour, I'll see you, Space Cowboy.